Hey all, I'm Hector Colonos, and welcome to the first recorded episode of Coworking Ops, a series on the included.co blog where we invite an expert to deep dive into a topic that's plaguing the thoughts and forums across the co-working world. Over the last few weeks, the Included ambassadors and many others have had ongoing discussions about whether or not COVID-19 is indeed transferable via air particles, and if it is, how best could co-working spaces adapt their mitigation strategies to best protect their customers, guests, staff, and their loved ones. In a recent article in The Atlantic, the case is made for seriously and rapidly adding ventilation into our infection mitigation stacks for schools and workplaces, putting ventilation as part of the strategy alongside cleaning and social distancing. The article goes on to say that, however, to date, there is no evidence of a truly long-range transmission of COVID-19, and that researchers had recommended that we should better call COVID-19 a short-range aerosol infection, as it better communicates the nature of the threat more accurately. As most of the particles are concentrated around the infected person, under the right circumstances, they can accumulate and get around. Now, the article is fantastic, in depth. Definitely check out the link below and have a read. However, there was one note that caught our attention and is what drove us to make this the first topic we dived into for these calls. The article states that in July, the disease exploded in the southern United States. And it was tied closely to the fact that people often went into air-conditioned spaces in order to avoid the sweltering heat. And that's what worried us. So today I'm joined by Jerome Chang, a licensed and still practicing architect and owner of Blank Spaces, and unanimously known as the friendliest guy in co-working. So together with the Blank Spaces team, he runs co-working in multi-business locations in Santa Monica, Culver City, and are opening a new location, I believe, in Long Beach too. So thanks for accepting our invite to chat, Jerome. First things first, how are you and how are yours?
I'm okay. My family has been fine. No one has gotten sick due to COVID. They've gotten sick for other reasons, and no one in my staff or my close friends have gotten it either. Sorry, I've had a few I've seen on Facebook who are, I would say, closer friends, but they aren't close here in LA. They are elsewhere. So that's been good. I've had a couple of close calls where people thought they might be, they tested, and then where they knew someone else who got it and they were testing as a result of contact tracing. But yeah, so far we've been lucky in that. And that's just even a positive test, let alone someone who has more serious symptoms or hospitalized.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear. Then hopefully those colleagues and friends of yours have a speedy recovery from
Yeah, one of them took a few weeks, but he got better eventually. He was a super fit guy,
and still,
yeah, down and out.
Yeah, so. I mean, this is the worrying thing about this disease. We still don't know a lot about it. But for people who haven't had the opportunity to meet you yet, other than the introduction, who are you, and why should people kind of listen to you around this kind of topic?
Hold on a second. Yeah, so I've been in the co-working industry now for moving on 13 years. I would say I'm pretty active in the industry, both locally and nationally, and wherever co-working is going on. I think just that repeated consistency has allowed me to hear and see what's going on. So most people know me as co-working. Some of them know that I practice as an architect, but very few know that before I was an architect, I was an engineer. I have a bachelor's in civil engineering you have to choose a focus, so it's structures. And then I have a master's in structural engineering. So I've spent some time on the science side. And when you look at, so we're on this topic of air quality, when you look on a lot of these air quality experts, A lot of them come from the engineering side, the physics side of how air moves. Um, and include some of them come from literally the environmental engineering, which is part of civil. Civil engineering is all the sort of quote unquote outdoors engineering, air, water, dirt, okay, and included plus concrete and steel stuff. But in terms of the outdoors, and so it's technically under my experience, my background, or at least just a not even an understanding. It's really just an approach to understand that type of science. And so putting that together, I've been speaking out more and more within our co-working threads about best practices for air quality. So taking all that science information that I'm researching, my architecture experience and what happens in the built environment, and then the operational side and say like, what are quick tips for best practices that are the most current? Because I read the Twitter feeds and the articles probably more than others. So that said, I'm obviously not an expert. This is not my strength, but I think within the co-working world, there are very few architects who focus on co-working. There are very few engineers who are focused in the built environment and also have done operations co-working. So I figured, you know, lack of anyone else stepping forward, it's my responsibility to step forward and provide what I do know.
And we appreciate
And
we appreciate that as well.
yeah, so let's get on the same page a little bit about the air quality, airborne, use some of the syntax.
Yep.
The topic, the subject, the science is called aerosol science, like an aerosol spray, okay? So droplets are generally considered referred to the actual water particles that are floating in the air, and they may be small, medium, or large, or tiny. And airborne transmission suggests that the virus goes through the air somehow. That's more like a colloquial medical term, but the science, the physics of a particle moving through the air is aerosol science. And of course, then you have to divide that up into short range and long range. And the short range, I think, is pretty indisputable as long as you believe that the virus is fatal. So we're talking about 50, 60% of the public generally agreeing that the virus is very lethal, very effective in doing so. And then therefore, short term being that, short range being that. But longer range, medium and longer range are actually becoming more and more recognized as a concern. And this is where the whole idea of whether or not you should be indoors and wearing masks all come into play. So let's just get that straight. It's aerosol science. The airborne transmission is just a way to describe the science for it, right? And it's like I drive a car, but you're really talking about Newtonian physics. You know, you're going from point A to B. All right, so just okay. Now, the one thing I try to describe to everyone to understand the lethality, the concern, and of course, the pervasiveness of this virus is to think of this as cigarette smoke. You can see the cigarette smoke, you can smell the cigarette smoke from a short distance and afar. The virus can travel just like that, right? Again, I'm going to clarify again, I'm not an expert, and there's definitely some pros and cons of making the analogy of this virus with cigarette smoke. But for the rest of us, 95%, 99% of us, this will help you more quickly get up to speed. So cigarette smoke has been, after decades, has been deemed as really bad for you. And anyone who does smoke knows this and chooses to go ahead and, you know, damage their lungs and affect others. The virus is at sort of like the early part of this game, of understanding cigarette smoke, because there's a lot of resistance for a lot of reasons, politically, but economically and all that. So as cigarette smoke, then there's also the primary cigarette smoke damaging your lungs. There's also the well-known, recognized, and agreed upon, and legislation behind it, that secondhand smoke, is bad, if not just as bad. Okay, which means it could affect you secondhand from 5 feet away, 10 feet away, or even from the apartment downstairs, creeping up through various air systems, or even through the open window in the balcony, coming back through your open window 15 feet away. Okay, you don't even see it, you can just smell it. And if you have a baby, you have someone who has a breathing issue, the cigarette smoke is going to affect you. Please just remember the virus as just that. Now, with that, you can readily understand that if you are indoors, that cigarette smoke is going to be even worse than outdoors. Okay. Actually, on that note, you can smell cigarette smoke like downstream down the sidewalk. The virus is the same thing. All right. Don't think that because you're 15, 20 feet away that you are in safe territory. No, it's there. The question is, how much of it is there and how effective, how much of a concern is there? And part of that will be directly controllable by you. If you're there briefly, relatively non-existent. If you're wearing a mask that filters the air that you breathe, then it's relatively non-existent. Okay, so some of it you can control and others you can't. So now for indoors, the more indoors, then the more pervasive it is, the longer it hangs, the more lethal it can remain for a longer time. And that's just in the air. We're not even talking about surface stuff. Okay, we'll get to that next. So everyone, just indoors is bad. Now, logic, everyone just use some logic. Ventilation. If you get fresh air, you generally like it, right? That's always been the case. It doesn't matter how beautiful the AC system is. If you have fresh air, that's always the ideal. No different than lights. You like your lights, but no one, the benchmark, the absolute benchmark is always the pure sun daylight, okay? And so what are ways that you can quickly improve the air quality and therefore reduce the lethalness of COVID-19, specifically COVID-19 and other virus particles in the air? Open the windows, open the doors, crosswind, good ventilation, okay? And that means fresh air ventilation. That is just absolute key. The idea that you can just keep blasting the AC to feel cooler is not fresh air ventilation. That's circulation, not ventilation. Okay, the air is moving around, but you're just mixing the pot of bad stuff. However, it looks better because it looks like it's more distributed and you feel colder. And really, it's just trying to achieve one thing: lower the temperature. It does not give you quality. Okay. So I think those are the best quick tips. Indoor eating at a restaurant, no, just don't do it. If you have to do it, you find yourself coming across it, be near the door, be near the window, something where you get fresh air. Okay. Now, another thing about fresh air is to understand there's a basic metric called the air change rate. I don't think that's technically the right 3 words. There's a scientific one that everyone's using, but basically the number of air changes per hour. Your typical home is maybe like 0.5 or 1, and maybe 2, but it's really down low. The ideal you want in order to have a healthy mix of healthy ventilation is 6. That means that the entire air volume of the room that you're in will change over 6 times. And above that, of course, is great. So that's your kind of goal. How you measure it, let's just move on. But if you're reading articles and stuff, 6 is your number. Home is around 1. Office and other work areas, school, classrooms, 6. Now, this is totally unintuitive. Airplanes. People have hated airplanes, the air quality, blah, 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 right? The air exchange rate there is like 20 plus. The air change rate there is 20 plus. That's amazing. Is it fresh air and ventilation? Probably not, but they compensate for it with such great air changes, frequent air changes, and high quality filters. You may not deem that as high quality in terms of either smell or like the staleness, but the purity, the cleanliness of it has been done, which is what we need to do for the virus.
That's
So
a
if
great.
everyone's facing forward on the airplane, and if they do minimum to no talking, the airplane is actually a pretty good situation, with a few problems, but generally it's good. Like when they deliver snacks and meals and everyone takes off the mask at the same time, that's almost bad. Like they should almost do that in a very delayed delivery. But yeah, just use some common sense. You want to improve the air ventilation. Um, and so some people who are into physics will say, well, then what is that measuring? Like, okay, that's the physics of moving air. The one way to measure that, of course, is carbon dioxide. The less carbon dioxide shows that there's fresh air, oxygen, right? Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of people breathing. So if there's a high level of breathing, expelling and exhaling, then you have a high level of carbon dioxide. And so one of the best ways that people do measure is what is the carbon dioxide level. And I was just reading before this thing, doing some quick last minute research, is that a typical carbon dioxide level may be, let's say 400 outdoors, okay? If you are indoors, it will go up to, like let's say 3 people in the room, 4,500 parts per million. But if you're in a car that's enclosed, you have the window open, it drops down to like 700. So you can see that might almost seem a little counterintuitive. I have windows open and it's like air is coming in, but because there is some level of being trapped within the ceiling in a close environment, it won't be as good as outdoors. So when I've had to drive in the car maybe once or twice with other people, I sit window seat, rolls down, and my head is halfway out the window. That's what I do.
That is, I mean, that's fascinating. You dropped a whole bunch of really insightful knowledge there, and I think you touched on the fact of ventilation, circulation. Let's kind of dig into a little bit more on filtration. For people who aren't haven't got engineering backgrounds, what are the quick wins or the most important things for people to look at with regards to picking air filtering systems for their co-working spaces or shared workspaces?
Yeah, from what I've been reading, a lot of it really isn't that good of an ROI. I mean, you talk about in economics a diminishing return for sure. That said, you have a whole basket full of bunch of levers that you can pull, a basket full of tools where you can improve your situation. And certain things like masks, let's pick a number, will reduce your exposure 40%. Something will expose yourself 20%, 10%, 5%. They all have a percentage, but the dollars per percent is probably is diminishing for a lot of these air filters. Why? Okay. It's not that I don't think you should get them. It's just if you're weighing the economic pros and cons, the economic ROI, it's diminishing. One of the biggest misnomers out there is to just keep adding filters to your main HVAC system. Now that's assuming, of course, you even have control over it, because you may be in a building where the landlord not just dictates it as their jurisdiction, but you have to coordinate with them to get it done right. Okay, so let's say you feel good, throw in some air filters because someone said blah, 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 right? Your neighbor, your cat, your dog, whatever. You put that in. Think about the way the HVAC systems work, right? Anywhere. HVAC systems, not portable units. You pick a target temperature, 72, right? If the thermostat reads 72, the AC system is off. If the AC system is off, no air is going through that filter. That filter you bought is dormant, doing nothing. If the temperature deviates to 73 or 74, the AC system will kick on to get back to 73. So during that time, 20 minutes, 60 minutes, where the AC system does kick on, then your filter is working and it's doing what you emotionally had wanted to feel better about. And in certain climates, in certain buildings, certain places that are well insulated and stuff, that AC system does not even turn on a lot. Now, granted, the AC system is doing two things at all times. It is trying to maintain your temperature and is providing a level of air circulation, not ventilation, circulation, of which some of that air that's being circulated is coming from fresh air. So you talk about fresh air intake percentage, blah, blah, blah. And of course, that all then depends on where you are in the space relative to your building and how far that fresh air had to come in to get to you. Okay. So keep in mind that you're doing the filters. And then when you add the filters, guess what you're doing? If your system was made for like general office air and you add a filter that is like hospital grade, oh yeah, hospital grade, what are you doing? You're choking your system. You're causing your system to push harder to get the air through a filter that's stronger in order to deliver your air. Well, not all AC systems are built to go at that level of intensity, let alone that often. So if you are blessed with an AC system that you know is relatively new or that is can handle much more than the volume of space that you have, and you can turn it on all the time, great. But most people don't have that luxury, may not even know how to find out about that luxury. And then that typical quarterly maintenance that you have in the system is going to be monthly or weekly, because it's not used to just, even if you're driving a car, your foot is not on the pedal the entire time. There's level of time where it goes into a neutral mode to coast, right? For a variety of situations. Same thing. If your car had to always be revving like that, it would just die. Yes. So that one is about the big filters, adding whether it's MERV 13 or better, and other type of filters. Okay. Now, when you talk about portable air units, you're going to have to go through a lot of the what do you call that? Kind of not fake science, but like magic voodoo. This thing, with great advertising, that thing sounds great. There are published lists by air quality experts on which ones are better. One I see all the time is Molecule, and I don't remember how high up on that list that is, but getting the right one will be like a colossal big challenge, just to like sift through all the the advertising. Then how you use it is a whole nother thing, and where you use it. So let's talk about portable air units a little bit. You want to create a negative pressure in the room. Negative pressure is when there is a net output of air out of your room, right? If you want to cause circulation, where if you breathe out, you want that exhale to then get dissipated and move out of the room, right? So you want to position your filter in a way so that when it's blowing the air is in a direction that helps increase the ventilation out of the room. And so what some people recommend is like, if you get even El Cheapo box fan that is 20, 25 bucks, that's like your typical 2 foot by 2 foot, that loud fan that you see, you put that in the doorway, in a window, blowing air out, not in. You normally put it air in order to create this effect of increased ventilation so that you feel cooler. Really, it's just fresh air. Because if you have a humid air, you're not really getting cooler. You want to push the air out, create the negative pressure, right? So that's if you have a box fan. If you have one of those that are portable, you want to put it in the center of the room. Well, actually, the box fan, if you put it in the center of the room and you're driving the air out to wherever it can, that will be helpful too. But I think the exterior is better because you're driving directly in the direction. You're driving directly in the direction that you want. But the other types that are more portable, like cylindrical type or the smaller units, put it in the center of the room, or even like put it next to you so it goes out. Like for example, if you're talking to one or two other people. So yeah, center of the room, outwards.
Which kind of sounds counterintuitive. As you said, you'd think to blow it onto you is going to make it better.
No,
for you, but
you don't want it on you at all. Yeah.
And yeah, you also touched on the point that, filters, even the portable fans are all part of like a mitigation strategy. It's not
That's right.
one solution that's going to solve it. It's masks, it's hygiene, it's cleaning, it's everything. This is just one of the pieces. On the topic of the sort of movable, portable filters, there is a lot of debate, both in co-working and outside of co-working, around the whole idea of ionizers and whether they are
Yeah.
good for you, good for the ozone, good for everything. Any quick points around that before we move on?
Yeah, well, there's the deionizers, there's a UVC, and technically you should be using UVC far if you can get to it. So why don't we start with the deionizers first? It basically is like a bug zapper. It goes and bugs. One thing you have to be careful about is making sure that when and where you're using it, it has enough time to zap it. Okay, but in general, I like the deionizers because they don't have any secondary unintended consequences like UVC. Like you cannot zap UVC onto someone. Okay, everyone, just get that clear. UVC is bad for humans. It's good for the air. So if you can, in a situation where the room is vacated, or it points in a direction like what they did back in the 20s during the last outbreak, massive outbreak, you zap the air above the head level. You're kind of pointing it up. So that's fine. And then if you can get that specific, there's a spectrum within UVC called UVC far that's actually okay for humans, but I don't think anyone really wants to play that game of like, oh, I have far and I don't have far, so I can be exposed. You just generally, it's like X-rays, you just get away from it. But the deionizers will generally be inside your HVAC system. And so let's think about again how that air works. Air comes from outside somewhere, comes in through your HVAC system, gets through the ventilation, and at some point gets to your filter, right? Or in this case, you might choose an deionizer or both. So as it comes through, it's going to zap the air inside your HVAC and then come to you. On that route, you have some assumption that the air from the outside is bad, which it might be if you're next to some factory or something. But in general, that's actually the ideal air. Now, the other part of the ionizer will do that, but then also as the air comes through your room, sucks back out into the HVAC system, so it recirculates, and then it'll deionize. That's great, right? And that's where the filters also kick in as a potentially effective measure, but as I said again, it has a diminishing return. Watch that air path. You're coming from into your space, into the infected air, comes back through the HVAC system and recirculates. That's a very long path. That's not primary exposure. That's not secondary exposure. It's speculative tertiary exposure. Could it happen? Absolutely. Should you do it? If you can, great. But just know that that's only on the recirculation. Now, if you're inside an interior space deep into a building and the recirculation is going to be a higher likelihood than another space in the building, well, then of course you're at a higher risk, and so therefore that measure will be more useful. But the deionizer is a device you put inside your HVAC in those critical areas, but it's mostly on the recirculation path.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, once you just map out, I mean, air and water is nothing special, right? You just kind of, there's a physics and you can follow it. It's not like digital stuff where you're like, wow, how did that volt go through the computer chip and it's like this magical thing, right? This is nothing. It's air, right?
Flow, yeah. Flow dynamics. Perfect. So I wanted to ask two last questions before I let you get out of here. The one is on the topic of like, we're going into winter now and we're going from cooling the spaces to heating. Is there anything with regards to heating up the air that we should be thinking about, whether it's going to create more circulation or things like that? And then we'll just touch on the economics once we've answered this question.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm about to say is kind of close to what's supposed to be, but I forget. And I've published this in a couple of places. But basically, relative humidity. All right, there's a water humidity, water moisture content in all your air. And the relative humidity, they've done studies on how the virus thrives or dies in different levels of humidity, and it has an ideal optimum and it has an less than ideal. If you use an electric heater, it will make your air seem dry. You know, people talk about dry skin inside. It will be even drier. That's not going to be good for this virus. You want to increase the relative humidity so that it doesn't survive. So it's going to be counterintuitive. You're going to want it to be a more humid air than a typical air system. And you may not have that choice. Now, again, this is a luxury. If you have a steam-based everything, like sort of how some people have those kind of, especially in New York and Boston, they have those kind of coils near the windows, and sometimes it goes bad. It has that knocking sound. That's a steam-based. Uh, in that case, that's going to probably achieve the proper relative humidity. And of course, it happens on the flip side of the summer when, yeah. So, anyways, there's a relative humidity, and I'm gonna have to look up the numbers. I think most people are in the 30 to 60%, but then you want to be in the 50 to 70%. Anyway, so I can follow up on that and find out the percentage. But just in general, the type of heating system you'll have will directly correlate to a more optimum or less than optimum condition for the virus to exist in
That's
the air.
fascinating. And we'll also share that link. We'll get it from you and put it into the show notes for this story. And just circling back to the final question about diminishing returns and the economic impact. There's a lot of spaces who, for obvious reasons, are drastically short on budget right now.
Mhm.
Is there any sort of quick wins that are affordable DIY that you've seen that actually help, that smaller operators can kind of take on board and try to add to that mitigation strategy of theirs, knowing that it's not the best, but it does some good?
Yeah. Okay. I'm a small operator. I have 2, 3 locations there, and there's only so much I'm going to invest in something where I just don't feel like there's any decent ROI on it. Um, so our county has already restricted our level of office use. So we basically shut down our meeting rooms. Monthly members can use them, but outside guests cannot. So we kind of reduce the number of random people who use it. Um, we keep the doors open before and after a meeting, and phone booths to enable the circulation, the air change rate to be good, even if the AC is not on. Okay, especially in closed environment like phone booths. Like phone booths, my God, can be really bad. Uh, that said, I did get confirmation from the room's manufacturer, the CEO, and he said the air change rate is like 15 plus in the room thing, the way that they designed it. So good for them. Um, so that's a cheap one. Keep your doors open. If you can buy a box fan where you can create cross ventilation, do it, especially if it goes directly outside. If you get portable units, put them in the center of the room. But if you just don't have people using the meeting rooms, like very few people, then that like solves that. That's free. The opportunity cost of that sale for 1 to 4 hours of that meeting room versus the potential exposure, like it's not worth it for me. Okay, so for me, that's like reducing my risk versus ROI. Another thing we do is that the surface cleaning. Again, that's one of those things that is one of the things you can do, but exhaustively and so obsessively cleaning is not going to is a accelerating a diminishing ROI, because the only way that you can really get infected from the surface through surface transmission is, let's say you wipe your hand on a table that's infected, then you put your hand and you lick it, or you pick your nose or something. I mean, how many people are doing that? That's why surface transmission so far has been well under 20% of the cases. So is 20% big? You may think so. Like you may be immunocompromised, any number of situations, like you need to get that percentage down. But I think for many people, surface transmission is much less of a risk than is aerosol. So airborne transmission is much more of a risk because it's more pervasive and lingers much longer and affects more people. You know, again, you have to touch a surface for you to transmit it. You can't avoid the air. So what we do is that we do clean when people use it, and we do general cleaning, you know, a couple of times a day, but really limited to the areas where people have been using it. Keep the doors open. We haven't got the box fan because we're in a retail space. We don't have a lot of windows. And we haven't invested at all in dividers whatsoever. I think the front desk might make some sense if there's a decent amount of like interface with customers, but we use social distancing, and the front desk is also near the front door, like literally outdoor front door. So we have a good amount of circulation. But the dividers, you think about air, the divider's not going to stop the air. It's going to go right above it and around it. The dividers are most effective if there is close proximity interaction. Like you have to be within 3 feet, 4 feet of someone and talking, even if it's for 2 minutes. So that will reduce the primary, the short distance exposure. But the secondary and tertiary, they go up and around, not at all. And the worst is if you have a divider that's great between two desks and someone's standing next to you and talks to you, well, that, you know, it just went right over the divider. So I think if you can afford it and it makes your customers feel better, okay, that's going to be a business decision on you. We have chosen not to bother investing in it because there's just too many ways for that to be a complete waste. You know, people will just, someone's walking versus someone standing, any number of reasons, like the aerosol will go up and around it. Just, I don't see it.
Thanks, and that I think that's going to be pretty useful for a lot of people who, like you, haven't got, you know, let's say crazy amounts of funding to just, you know, to redeploy, or they haven't got permission, or it's not their building, they're renting, you know, they're leasing, subleasing. I think a lot of those tips will help. I think that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you very much for your time, Jerome. I know that, you know, you must be crazy busy right now, and I appreciate you taking that step up and sharing from an engineering architecture perspective. I know we didn't really touch much on design. Is there anything you wanted to last minute drop on how the design of a space or the layout of a space will affect the air quality? And then we can let you go after that.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that people are kind of, just like people had a backlash against open offices. Remember, there was a backlash against open offices that were done poorly. Open offices is a great concept when done appropriately, but when it got bastardized and reappropriated in so many different ways, then of course, those were bad, right? So the pendulum's going to swing somewhere in the middle. Same thing goes with office density or seating density. The idea that, oh my God, you know, we're co-working spaces, we're down to like 15, 60 square feet per person. And a lot of tech companies were going down to 120, 150. Consulting companies were in the 170, consulting companies like Ernst & Young and all those who didn't have a lot of workforce in the office because they were out and about, or if they came in, it was very infrequent, was in the 160, 175 range. Corporate office uses were in the 250, 350 range in terms of square feet per employee, per desk. So it's a relatively big range, and people are kind of like a knee-jerk reaction saying, forget it, 125, 150 is bad, we're gonna go back up to 300. So now people will need more office space. Okay, on a unit metric level, on a square foot per person, that does correlate to social distancing. But that means that people are in their seats. What happens when people go to the bathroom, walk around the hallways, they use the kitchen, all of that gets obliterated, right? So human behavior will obliterate your density, and therefore you've spent the money and all that. Now, co-working specifically, I would say that most people find that only 30 to maybe 50 or 60% of your paid members are even using your space at the same time. So let's say you have 100 desks, you have 100 paying members for 100 dedicated desks, not talking about shared desks, like those seats. Maybe 30, 40, maybe 50 people are even in there. So your density, you've designed for 50 square feet per person, per desk, right? well, at least we work in, a lot of us. That means your density is now 100. So you've already doubled it. Now, if you're in the 30 range, you've tripled it. You're in the 150 range. So you can still design for density if you know your utilization is closer to 1/3, right? Or 1/4, or any number of things. Then if you combine that with some distancing and some other smart design technique, then you'll get the density that you want. But that will only be as good as your facility management, your operations, that, one-way circulation, social distancing, masks, and all that stuff. Distancing, as it correlates to implicit social distancing, is only one mitigation tool. So everyone, just stop this office density right off the bat. I continue to design at full office density pre-pandemic, because then there's also another reason. You have 6 people in a tight office, right? You are assuming all 6 will be there, but that company who gets that may only choose to use 2 out of those 6. In fact, they might have 20 people who have access to those 6, but only 2 are there at a time because of their own policy. So you can design for that density and then mitigate it through the execution, through the operations. Okay, so be careful on where you spend your money and how you do it, and then permanently affecting your ROI, your margins.
I mean, yeah, this is a topic, and I mean, I can talk to you all day, all week. I'm sure we could drag this on. Where can people find you, ask you more questions, or learn more about what you're up to?
Sure, you can email me directly, jerome@blankspaces.com. And you can also find me on Twitter, Jerome USA. I'm on a few other channels like Instagram and Facebook, but I think the ones that are most public to everyone are those 2. And I will, I continue to retweet and tweet air quality stuff, more specifically because I'm retweeting from the air quality experts on Twitter. And yeah, that's it. So
Awesome.
really simple.
Thank you very much, Jerome.
All right. Thanks, Hector.